Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat. Resolves.
Thank you.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Happy New Year, Magic players. My name is DJ, and this is the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. I have a commander that I've been very excited about. I've just built a brand new Shalai Voice of Plenty Selesnya deck, and I can't wait to share it with you. Shalai Voice of Plenty is 3 and a white for a 3/4 legendary creature angel. Shalai has flying, you, planeswalkers you control, and other creatures you control have hexproof. Shalai also has an activated ability, 4 green to put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. I spent some time over the past month building my own version of Shalai because it really fits my playstyle. Let me explain to you why. I've found out that I really like decks that have varying strategies within a single commander deck, and Shalai fits that really well. In the baseline of Shalai, you have a creature strategy, where you have a bunch of creatures, and then you can pump them with Shalai and protect them with Shalai, and it's a cool creature combat deck. Then as the game progresses, you can make your dorky little creatures into real threats as you add +1/+1 counters to them, and also you can go deeper into the +1/+1 counter synergy that we know exists in Selesnya. But it's not just +1/+1 counter synergies. White and green have so many creature-based synergies, and it seems like everything works so well together. Some land synergies, some graveyard synergies. But I think I really enjoy the toolbox aspect of these Selesnya decks most of all. I like the ability to have my creatures answer whatever my opponent's throwing at me. And finally, I want my decks to be able to be powerful and win the game. And that's why Shalai can pivot from a disruptive creature aggro strategy into a combo win if I really need to. And these layers and levels of interaction within a deck has me really excited because I feel like I can really tune it to my metagame, I can really tinker with it, I can really enjoy playing it. So let's break this down and find out how I built Shalai Voice of Plenty. I think the defining characteristic of this Selesnya deck is it's going to be built so heavily around creatures. Not only do I think they work well together, I think that Shalai being able to pump my irrelevant creature into something really, really significant gives this deck a lot of reach that many other creature decks don't have. And so I'm going to cram this deck full of creature-based ramp. I know it's not as safe as getting lands onto the battlefield, but I really think that they work well with the commander and synergize together. Birds of Paradise is a classic and it can tap for both my colors. Having flying is going to be really important because an evasive body is the kind of body I want to pile +1/+1 counters on. And in fact, a real creature I want to put +1/+1 counters on is Gyre Sage. Man, you can stack +1/+1 counters on this little elf druid and then tap for crazy amounts of mana. And this can actually combo pretty nicely with Shalai, adding more and more counters in the late game and then fueling Shalai to be able to add even more counters. Rishkar Pima Renegade can turn your entire team into mana dorks, which is a very powerful effect. Courser of Krufix doesn't ramp us, but it gives us some virtual card draw if we can play lands off the top of our library. Oracle of Moldiah does ramp us into the late game if we can hit those double land drops every turn. Lands can be one of the first synergy and card advantage engines that this deck can have. Emiria Shepherd is a big drop, but being able to pull things from your graveyard back onto the battlefield is very powerful. If you want to go a little bit heavier into the landfall strategy, Avenger of Zendikar and Emiria Angel could be an inclusion. I think I'm just going to go with a Secure Tribe Elder to be able to pull every plains out of my library when it combos with Emiria Shepherd. Also, these cards are just plain old good, and they just really belong in this deck together. But I think the core of this Lands Matter strategy lies with Ramunap Excavator and Knight of the Reliquary. This combination allows access to so many different lands, especially utility lands. Something like Gavany Township could be just a no-brainer in this deck, but also Strip Mine and Gaia's Cradle and whatever else you can think of that we can have access to with this suite of creatures. And so that transitions us into the toolbox suite of creatures that we have available to us. I think one of the most important types of creatures that you can have in this deck are disruptive ones. Thalia, Heretic Cathar, really slows your opponent down. Having their creatures enter tapped really messes with their mana base if they're a little bit greedy. Dragonlord Dramoka can be just a big beater, but it can also provide a really important level of protection. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. If you want to lean a little bit more into the combos that I'm going to discuss a little bit later, then maybe cards like Dragonlord Dromoka or Grand Abolisher could be important for your strategy. I want to talk about a couple cards. Aven Mind Sensor is a great one. It helps interrupt your opponent's ability to search their library because they can only search the top 4. Now, something very similar is Leonin Arbiter. It's a 2-drop for a 2/2 cat cleric, and it just says players can't search their libraries, and you can pay 2 to ignore that effect. So Aven Mind Sensor only affects your opponents. Leonin Arbiter affects all players. But Leonin Arbiter comes down earlier, so it can provide more disruption than the Aven Mind Sensor, even though it disrupts you. I'm going with the Aven Mind Sensor and I'm leaving the Leonin Arbiter out, but if you want to make this deck a tiny bit more spiky, you can lean into the Leonin Arbiter type effects that even hamper yourself because you know it's going to impact your opponents way more than you. Actually, a similar card is Alms Collector. Alms Collector is a flashy 4-drop cat that lets you draw when your opponents have big draw spells. This is contrasted with Spirit of the Labyrinth, a 2-drop that says all players, each player, can't draw more than 1 card each turn. See, that punishes you as well, but green and white doesn't have a lot of card draw, so maybe it's worth it to punish the entire table. I'm going to go with Aven Mind Sensor and Alms Collector, and I'm going to leave out Leonin Arbiter and Spirit of the Labyrinth, but I did want to sort of introduce you to the more hateful of the hate bears, and really let you know how powerful they are because they're so much cheaper. Being 2 drops is way better than being 3 and 4 drops. There are very powerful versions of this deck that lean on Leonin Arbiter and Spirit of the Labyrinth, but I would caution against starting your deck with them. Instead, start with a little bit more of a forgiving build, and then start tweaking the power level to fit your meta. I think that's good advice because we have some more hateful cards coming in. Sanctum Prelate. As Sanctum Prelate enters the battlefield, choose a number. Non-creature spells with converted mana cost equal to the chosen number can't be cast. Sometimes you're trying to dodge a very specific spell from your opponent, and Sanctum Prelate can shut it off. Gaddock Teague is an amazing hate bear. Non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater can't be cast. And non-creature spells with X in the mana cost can't be cast. Wow, this shuts down some decks completely. And Archon of Valor's Reach is a 6 mana 5/6 with flying, vigilance, and trample, but the important text is that when it enters the battlefield, choose artifact, enchantment, instant, sorcery, or planeswalker. Players can't cast spells of the chosen type. These cards can help mitigate one of the greatest weaknesses of these creature-based strategies, and that's board wipes. Man, board wipes can just ruin your day because you're committing so much to the board. You're emptying out your hand, you're trying to lock up different aspects of the game with different creatures on the battlefield. Maybe you're building up some mana to be able to start putting counters on them, and then a board wipe sets you back so far. And so what better way to shut off board wipes than a Gaddock Teague or an Archon preventing your opponents from casting sorceries? A small word of warning, some people hate these kinds of cards. So if you want to experiment with them, I would suggest starting off with the Archon of Valor's Reach. It's super inexpensive, it's a 6-drop. You know, you're not trying to shut someone's game off completely when you're playing a 6-drop. And it can come down and just sort of help interrupt your opponents a little bit. They can still play their decks, they just maybe can't play the board wipe to get rid of your awesome 5/6 trampling Vigilant Flyer. Next, consider interrupting your opponent's graveyards with Scavenging Ooze or the new card Ravenous Slime. I haven't played Ravenous Slime, so I think I want to try it out and see what it's like. And finally, this deck runs only a handful of artifacts and enchantments, so we can play cards like Bane of Progress, wiping away the entire board and getting a huge monster. Or an underrated favorite of mine, Molder Slug, a 5 mana 4/6, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact. It just omnoms all the artifacts every single turn. Against some decks, this just, I don't know, eats a Soul Ring and a Signet, but against other decks, man, they just cannot cope. Love this card. And of course, we're gonna have flexible cards like Knight of Autumn. It gets counters. We have counters synergy in this deck, that's good. It can gain you 4 life, it's pretty good, but most importantly, it can eat an artifact or an enchantment. These are just some of the creatures I wanted to mention, the ability to answer certain types of strategies. This of course can be tuned to your meta. If you have an opponent that has a lot of activated abilities on creatures, play a Linvala, Keeper of Silence. If you are definitely going against a bunch of artifact strategies, a Kataki, War's Wage can just destroy them. This is infinitely customizable, so make sure to play with your creature suite. That's part of the fun of building a deck like this. Now, having a single creature-based answer in your deck somewhere doesn't actually win you a game. You need consistency. You need to be able to get the right creature at the right time. Eldritch Evolution, Chord of Calling, Birthing Pod, all of these can get your creatures straight onto the battlefield. This can disrupt your opponents at just the right time. Or later on when we talk about combos, these things can get your combo enablers right onto the battlefield exactly when you need it. Recruiter of the Guard doesn't get the creature onto the battlefield, it gets it to your hand, but it's a creature itself. So yeah, I can put counters on it, I can Birthing Pod it away into a 4-drop. I love Recruiter of the Guard. There's actually a ton of different ways to get the creatures that you need when you need them. Worldly Tutor, Eldamri's Call, Survival of the Fittest. There's actually a lot of different ways. I would say don't go too heavy on the searching effects. You need to have a balance to the creatures you search up and the cards that search them out. Your deck could end up pretty slow and clunky if you have too many ways to search up creatures and not enough, creatures to play. I love this next creature tutor, Ranger of Eos. 4 CMC for a 3/2, and Ranger searches up 2 creatures with CMC 1 or less. So you think these aren't creatures I really want in Commander, but they totally are. Mother of Runes is a great 1-drop. Birds of Paradise can ramp you into bigger spells a little bit later. Walking Ballista can be a combo enabler, can finish out the game with infinite mana. Macae's Lunarch goes deeper with those +1/+1 counter synergies, can build up your entire team. Serra Ascendant is a 6/6 flying lifelinker. Withered Wayfarer can reliably get you any land you need. And remember, we already talked about a land toolbox as well. Man, Ranger of Eos is just so much value. I love him. I want to mention a few more elements of consistency that bridge upon combo. Protean Hulk. You can have a value Hulk in here. That's totally fine. But we both know that there are probably going to be combos in this deck, and Protean Hulk might just win the game out of nowhere. And yeah, they totally will. Same thing goes with Pattern of Rebirth. These are fun cards that could provide levels of consistency or help you combo. But everyone's going to think you're comboing, so just be careful. The final piece of consistency I want to talk about is graveyard interaction. We have cards like Sun Titan and Eternal Witness giving you tons of value from the graveyard. And we already mentioned this earlier. We already have a Myria Shepherd that will pull stuff from the graveyard, and we have Ramunap Excavator messing around with the graveyard and lands as well. And so we can see that these cards really tie together and have a lot of synergy. Alright, this deck can totally function and be great without any combos. But I've found that I want my decks, especially creature-based decks, aggro decks, to have a little bit of combo potential in them, so if I need to, I can win a game. So I'm quickly going to run through a few combos that you could have in this deck. You don't have to have all of them, in fact, you don't have to have any of them. But some of them are pretty fun and they do synergize with your commander, so maybe just a sprinkling of combo. Let's see what we got. First up, we have kind of a boring one. It's such a classic one. It's Karmic Guide and Revelark. These two combine together with a sacrifice outlet to just keep pulling each other from the graveyard over and over again. Revelark gets 2 creatures power 2 or less, so you can keep recurring another creature along with it. Or get something like infinite mana if you have like a Phyrexian Arena, or infinite mill if you have like an Ultra of Dementia. I say this is a little bit boring because people have seen these cards working together over and over and over again. The problem is that these are so good just on their own in the fair game. Revelark would love to pull cards from the graveyard onto the battlefield. That Recruiter of the Guard is getting small creatures, so is Ranger of Eos. So the value of getting them back with Revelark is pretty good. Let's talk about Devoted Druid. Devoted Druid is 1 and a green for a 0/2, tap it to add green to your mana pool, and you can put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid to untap Devoted Druid. When you combine Devoted Druid with a card like Vizier of Remedies, well, it just produces infinite mana. You tap the Devoted Druid, and then when you go to untap it by putting a -1/-1 counter on it, Vizier of Remedies says, oh, if 1 or more -1/-1 counters would be put on a creature, Well, that many -1/-1 counters -1 are put on it instead. That means no -1/-1 counters are put on Devoted Druid, and it untaps anyways. And so you just produce all the mana, and then what do you do with infinite green mana? Here's just the great part. You have a mana sink in your command zone. Yeah, it's 6 mana to put +1/+1 counters on everything, but Shalai would love to do that, and just producing infinite green mana and being able to make your creatures infinitely big is, well, pretty fun and cool. Vizier of Remedies works with other creatures as well, specifically the creatures with Persist. I want to talk about Kitchen Finks and Woodfall Primus. Let's take Woodfall Primus for example. You got a healthy Woodfall Primus on the battlefield and a Vizier of Remedies. With just a simple sacrifice outlet, you send the Woodfall Primus to the graveyard. And then the Woodfall Primus says, aha, I will persist back to the battlefield. And so it comes back to the battlefield, and you'll try to put a -1/-1 counter on it. It'll try to do that. But then Vizier of Remedies will go, nope, and it'll end up on the battlefield with no -1/-1 counters. And so if you sacrifice it again, trying to send it back to the graveyard, it'll just come right back again. This works great with Woodfall Primus because it'll destroy target non-creature permanent. That could just mean everyone else's lands. Or you can get a ton of value by sacrificing it for value. Like I mentioned, the Altar of Dementia to mill them, or an Phyrexian Altar to gain some mana. Kitchen Finks will essentially gain you infinite life. That sounds pretty good too. Both of these cards in this Persist engine also works with Malira Sylvic Outcast. But one thing you're going to want to pay attention is that Malira does not work with Devoted Druid. Devoted Druid has to put the -1/-1 counter on it, and Malira says, nah, that can't even happen. So your Devoted Druid will actually never untap. But I'm going to end up putting this entire combination of creatures into this deck because they work so well together. And another great thing about Persist is that you don't need to combo in order to reset the Persist. Your commander can do it for you. Just a single activation and suddenly those -1/-1 counters are poof, gone, and you have fresh Woodfall Primus, a fresh Kitchen Finks to gain value over and over again. Now, I already mentioned Sun Titan. I think it's going to be great in this deck. Why not throw in a Fiend Hunter as well? With a sacrifice outlet that gains you value, this is just game winning. Fiend Hunter exiles the Sun Titan, you sacrifice the Fiend Hunter, it'll go to the graveyard, Sun Titan comes back in and pulls the Fiend Hunter out of the graveyard right back onto the battlefield, and so you can exile the Sun Titan underneath it again. Then you're in a loop. Sacrifice the Fiend Hunter goes to the graveyard, Sun Titan comes back. Sun Titan says, hey, I'm gonna bring the Fiend Hunter back. Fiend Hunter covers up the Sun Titan gets exiled, sacrifice the Fiend Hunter again. It's very similar to Safi Erikstarter and Renegade Rallier. By the way, Safi Erikstarter also combos with the Sun Titan, because Safi says, sacrifice Safi, when target creature is put into the graveyard from play this turn, return that card to play. So I'll sacrifice the Safi and say the next time Sun Titan goes to the graveyard, I'll get it back again. And then I'll sacrifice the Sun Titan, it goes to the graveyard, and Safi's like, oh, hey, you get Sun Titan back again. Sun Titan comes back on the battlefield and says, hey, I can pull something CMC 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. I'm going to choose Safi. And then suddenly you have both of them back onto the battlefield again, and hopefully you've gained a little bit of advantage from sacrificing that Sun Titan. Again, we can replace Sun Titan with Renegade Rallier because it can get a permanent with converted mana cost 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Look at that Safi being CMC 2 or less. Imagine that. But remember, these cards just work really well in our whole strategy. Sun Titan can bring back fetch lands. They can bring back lands that we sent to the battlefield with our Knight of the Reliquary. Safi can protect a critical creature. Safi can even sort of reset the -1/-1 counter on a persist creature so we can get more advantage out of them. It just seems like these cards work so well together. Let's keep going with one more combo. The final combo I have for you today also deals with +1/+1 counters. It's Archangel of Thune and Spike Feeder. Archangel of Thune is just really solid in any creature deck. It says, whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Yeah, we know we have +1/+1 counter synergies in this deck. This could also get rid of those persist -1/-1 counters, or just pump your dorks into something huge. And combined with Spike Feeder, well, it totally goes off. Spike Feeder enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. You can remove a +1/+1 counter from Spike Feeder to gain 2 life. So it goes down like this. I'm going to remove a counter from Spike Feeder. I'm going to gain 2 life. Archangel of Thune says, I'm going to put a +1/+1 counter on everything. Yeah, it replenishes that +1/+1 counter back on Spike Feeder. So you can take that +1/+1 counter back off again, and Archangel Thune says, again, more +1/+1 counters. So you'll get an infinitely large Archangel of Thune, you'll have infinite life, and yeah, it's pretty broken and fun. So that is the deck. What do I think about Shalai, Voice of Plenty? Well, I've been playing it recently and I've been enjoying it a lot. I'm a huge fan of the flexibility, the ability to answer whatever your opponents are doing with a little bit of toolbox action, the ability to durdle by getting cards from your graveyard back onto the battlefield and adding +1/+1 counters to everything. It feels like there's always something to do. It also feels like I have some level of protection because Shalai gives my creatures and myself hexproof. But the best part of this deck is that it's infinitely customizable. You have the ability to put whatever hate bear you want in the deck. You can put whatever combo you want to sort of finish out the deck and round it out and make it a little bit more robust. You could go heavier in combo. You could leave the combos out completely. I'm a real big fan, and hopefully I've made you a fan too. I just talked about how many different ways there are to build this deck. If you want to see how I built it, go ahead and click on the link in the description. That'll take you to my deck list on TCGPLAYER.com. They sponsor the entire Jumbo Commander YouTube channel, and they're great. So buy cards from them, use the link in the description. Thanks TCGPLAYER.com, and thank you so much to my patrons. Thank you, patrons! We're going to have some new giveaways for the new year on Patreon, so go ahead and click on the link in the description if you're interested in supporting me. And thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more deck techs, more videos, and I also got a preview card for you coming out pretty soon. So make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of this. All right, everyone, bye-bye.